Hello, everyone. We're just going to give a minute or so for people to join in. Right, so hello everyone. My name is Francine. I am the Alumni Engagement Manager here at King's. Welcome to our first How-To webinar of this academic year. The How-To series webinars were specifically created for students and alumni who are in the early stages of career development. They are also relevant for any alumni looking to make a career change. You can find past webinars on our KCL Alumni YouTube channel. I'll put the link in the chat in a few minutes. And do also look out for future How-To webinars in your monthly e-news and on King's Connect. Don't forget that you can use the King's Connect platform to connect with your fellow students and alumni, grow your network, join a mentoring program, and access your alumni benefits. So well-being and performance in the workplace is not only important during these challenging times, navigating how to work from home and how to work in a hybrid way, but it is also important and applicable in more traditional ways of working. So I hope this webinar on how to improve your well-being at work will be useful for both uni future and in the longer run. Before we start, just a reminder to make use of the Q&A feature of this webinar. You could submit questions throughout the discussion for our speaker to address during the Q&A. And you can also upvote questions that you want to give priority, as we might not have time to get to all your questions. I will now hand over to our speaker, alumna and occupational psychologist, Mariam Malouli.
Okay, thank you so much, Francine. So my name is Mariam Malouli and I live in Denmark. And I studied at King's College in 2014 when I did a master's course in strategic HR and organization analysis. Sorry, my voice is a bit, I have a cold. Prior to studying at King's College, I used to be an occupational psychologist. So I worked as a psychologist for 4 years when I decided that I became more interested about understanding how organizations work and how the human psychology comes into play with that. So after graduating from King's College in 2015, I moved into more consulting roles where I did a lot of leadership development training and facilitating team workshops. Yeah. Oh, okay, sorry. There was a comment. And then 3 years ago, I actually went on my own because I became more passionate about understanding and working with one-to-one coaching, because I found out that there's so many passionate and ambitious people who burn out in the effort of sometimes trying to overcompensate for dysfunctional organizational systems. And I will later be talking about what makes an organization dysfunctional and how you can overcome this. So that was my journey. And I think the reason I've been interested in well-being and performance for many, many years, actually before studying in King's College, because in my work as an occupational psychologist, I met so many teachers who I was hired to support them in developing the children and the students. But what I found was that it's not necessarily the tasks or the competencies that are lacking. It's sometimes the motivation and the engagement due to not having enough resources that match demands that are put under. So I became much interested in well-being as a focus point, a focus area that I think organizations should have to ensure that well-being can actually be delivered. Because well-being is not always about not being motivated or not wanting to perform. Sometimes it's also about having the right resources that match the demands that we are put under. And this webinar today, I'm going to be focused on what you can do as an individual. So what is your level of influence? And sometimes that's not always enough, but sometimes it can actually change a lot because sometimes our own expectations also come into play. So the 3 tools I'm going to be sharing with you today are going to be the 3 tools that my coaching clients appreciate the most. So I'm hoping that giving you an introduction to these, and hopefully you can use them on your own, you can go out there and hopefully make the most of the start of your career. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much for this inspiring introduction, Mariam. So let's start by hearing about well-being in the workplace. Can you let us know what is well-being in the workplace? How do we take charge of our own well-being in a place where we want to perform well?
Yeah. So I want to start with what well-being looks like. Sorry, just my screen close. Just have a pop-up screen. I just have to. Okay. So I want to start with just talking about what well-being looks like, because I think well-being looks like somebody, if you go into an organization and you have a camera and you wanted to observe well-being, you would see employees who are engaged, who are challenged, and who have a supportive system around them. So they have a manager they can go to, they have co-workers that they can talk to, but also have fun with. So that's what well-being looks like. So when when your well-being is under threat, what you would typically see is somebody who's working too much, or where the intensity is too high, and where people don't engage with each other but complain, or they just leave tasks off. Sorry, Francine, did you leave? Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, just had a little...
So that's what well-being looks like, and when there's not well-being, that's what the other thing looks like. But what lack of well-being also looks like is when you see somebody who's lazy, somebody who doesn't want to do their job. And often we don't associate that with lack of well-being. We only associate it with stress. So typically when a manager, for example, comes to me and they want something with team development, they'll sometimes say, oh, there's a few lazy people. And that always intrigues my interest, because I typically see that as a clue to there's something going on in the organization that is making this person not want to put in the effort. So when I ask questions, I typically find out that it's the lack of role clarity, not enough resources, not trust in management, lack of trust in management, not enough communication, transparency. And what I also find out is that there's also the opposite of these people, which are people who are over-engaging, giving too much. And typically those are the ones that come to me for coaching. It's the one that when they have given so much over such a long period, where they're trying to overcompensate for the lack of organizational clarity, role clarity, so they take on too much just in case. Typically, they come to me when their performance is starting to be under threat, because what happens is when you're under pressure for too long and you don't get your sleep, you overwork yourself, is that your cognitive skills will be impaired. You'll start to lose concentration, you'll start to lose your irritable. So they come to me once they see that their performance is under threat. It's almost like if they could continue that level of engagement, they wouldn't come, because it would still pay off. So when they come to me, typically they have the story of the situation as they didn't do enough. They were the ones who couldn't handle the pressure. And so when I ask them, okay, so how are the other people in the department doing? Then they might say, or there's some people who don't do anything at all. And then there's some people who are just as stressed as them. But the interesting thing is when we're really under pressure, not only is it our cognitive skills that are impaired, it's also our emotional capacity, or emotional view of ourselves. Suddenly we're feeling like we're the ones who aren't measuring up. We're the ones who are not good enough. So we start internalizing actually these organizational dysfunctionalities as it being us who are not living up to it. So typically I will use this tool that I'm giving you. So this is the first tool. So Francine, if you could just put this up, please. Yes. So what I'll do, I don't call it the well-being audit when I'm doing it with them. I call it the stress audit. And it's developed, I think, by Mike Metzau, who's a psychologist here in Denmark and also a stress expert. And it's called the stress audit. The reason I'm calling it the well-being audit here is because I'm hoping that the people who are tuning in can use this to be ahead instead of having to work on the issues once they become difficult. What I'll typically do with a client is that I will ask him or her to just try to plot in. So to your right side, you can see there's a graph. So for each month, I will ask them to go back and evaluate, well, how was it to be at work? What was going on? What was the pressure you were under? And I'll ask them to reflect on organizational factors such as role clarity. What was the climate like? Did you get any feedback? Was there any clarity in terms of when was good enough? Like, so how was everything in the organizational context? And then I'll also ask them to reflect on any emotional, physical, or cognitive stress symptoms. This can be dizziness, headache, bad sleeping routines. It can be using food to cope with emotional distress or alcohol, and then I'll ask them to simply go into the graph and start plotting in how pressured were you. And the reason I do this is because clients, when they first come to me, is that they'll say, I've been pressured for a little while. And in their minds, they will actually believe that it's been maybe 6 weeks or something. Whereas in actuality, they've been pressured for half a year, sometimes a year and a half. And when they start doing this graph and they start plotting in it, start mapping what's actually been going on, it takes the shame away from them because they realize, okay, it makes sense that I'm reacting like this because I've been under too much pressure. So suddenly it's not about them not living up to the demands of the workplace. It's actually about the workplace not providing the right resources and the right circumstances for it to be possible for them to fulfill their role. So it's not to do with their internal lack, but it's something to do with the lackings within the organizational context. And later I'm going to present you to one tool of how you can actually deal with these insufficiencies in an organizational level so you can have these conversations with the ones you need to have them with in a professional way. But this first tool is just to say that typically when we are stressed, have burnout, it's not because we've been stressed for a week. It's typically because we've pressured ourselves for too long, where we're trying to overcompensate for something. And once we realize that we are stressed, it's often way after a lot of pressure. So we've been stressed for a while, so the acknowledgement or the realization of it just comes later. So you can use this tool basically for, let's say you're starting in a new job. You might want to be, well, in 3 months, maybe I'll do an audit. How is it going? Because typically when we start a new job, we're overly excited. So we want to show up as the best version of ourselves. And we also want to overcompensate. We don't want to be the ones who say, no, I don't have time for this. Sometimes we actually pretend like we know something, even though we don't, because we don't want to show ourselves from our weak sides. So this well-being audit can be a way for you to just monitor how am I actually doing, because typically when we have a bad week, we don't really reflect on it at the end of the day. We just go, phew, wait till Monday. And then it's only till we're looking back and we're doing this audit that we realize, oh, wow, it's actually been pretty tough. It hasn't been easy. And when you can look at it like this, you can better take the seriousness of it. Right? Because it's black on white. Can you put the next slide on? Because I just want to show an example of when a client had to do this. When she came to me, she had difficulty sleeping. She had just gotten another assignment because her coworker was actually on a sick leave with stress, by the way. So there was nobody else to do that assignment but her. So when she came to me, she came because she was starting to have difficulty sleeping. She started getting irritable with her manager. And her manager had basically told her, hey, I think you need to speak to somebody. Again, internalizing the difficulties instead of as a manager saying, okay, what is going on in the organization? How are we putting too much pressure on you? So the manager also individualized her pressure. So when she came to me, she had this story about herself as, well, I'm too weak to handle the pressure. I'm not good enough because everybody else can, but nobody else could. Because there were some people who were too lazy, and then there were some people who kept giving too much like she did, and they were burning out too. So when she did this, she had this real aha moment, and she kind of connected with herself. So instead of telling herself she wasn't good enough, she started looking at everything she's actually been doing. So what I also asked her to do is under January, February, March, April, May, also to put in like keywords. Like, so what was going on? So she would write something with, well, 2 people left my team. Then on the other runs, she wrote large organizational changes, IT systems. Okay, so there was something with training. Then there was a big project that had to run. And everything she became responsible for. But she hadn't, for her, when she came to me, it was in August. So she was basically just talking to me about the pressure she was going through in August. Whereas if we're just zooming out, suddenly the landscape looked completely different. So of course, if you're just pressured after 2 weeks, maybe that says something about your robustness. But this was actually 7 months. So suddenly the perspective shift made her internalize things less. She still has months of recovery, because once you get stress and burnout, it takes time. Just like it takes time to build it up, it takes time to work it through. But this helped take the shame out of it and change the narrative she had about herself. And by the way, if anybody has any questions, please come with them. We'll take them as we go, and there'll also be time for questions afterwards. Are there any questions to this? Nope.
It doesn't look like it at the moment, but we still have quite a lot of time, so we'll take them at the end whenever they appear.
Okay.
So yes, thank you, Mariam. So what you were saying is understanding our well-being really starts by monitoring our emotions and having like keeping track of our well-being, so we can make those changes if we need to.
Yeah. Can I add to that quickly?
Yeah.
It's important because typically when we're at work, we're in work mode, we're in action mode. We're more aware of externally what's going on, what are the demands on me, what is expected of me, what am I expecting of myself, and we're comparing ourselves a lot. So that means that when we're focusing outwards, we're lacking the focus internally. And although it's great to not always be like, how am I feeling every second, you should have occasionally check-ins with yourself, because it'll be something you will overlook day to day. It'll show up in your actions. Maybe you're neglecting your hobbies suddenly, or you're not really feeling social, or you find yourself overeating, undereating. But it's not like the typical person who will end up in burnout is also the person who won't ask themselves, what am I needing in this situation? They will more be asking, what expectations am I not living up to? And then blame themselves for not doing it.
Okay. Right. So now that we have this better understanding, how can we then align well-being and performance? Can you tell us what are the challenges to do so, and what can we do about it? And then as well, if you were in a difficult situation, how would you be able to tell your manager, for example, that you are experiencing difficulties with your well-being?
Okay. So we'll start with how to align well-being and performance. Well, those two, they go together. So short term, you can neglect your well-being and perform, but you can't sustain that level, because eventually, as we talked about before, the more you pressure yourself and not care for your well-being, it's like taking a loan with a high interest. You have to pay for it later, right? So you have to see that if you want to manage your performance and your career, you have to manage your well-being. It's not really, I sometimes feel like my clients initially, before they meet me, they see it as a choice. I can say, but they go together, right? So, and I think that it's also about being professional. Being professional is not about overcompensating. It's about being service-minded within the resources available to you. I typically use this metaphor of, let's say you have a shop, right? You own a shop where you sell groceries. Now, if somebody comes in and they have 10 pounds, but what they want is worth 50 pounds. So they come in with this checklist and they go, I want this. There's different ways of reacting. You could say, okay, just take it, right? But if you do that to everybody coming in, you're not going to have a shop. So that's not caring for your well-being. You can also say, no, you can't have that. You can have for 10 pounds or leave my shop. That's not really that good either, right? So what would be professional here and performance minded and well-being minded to say, no, you have 10 pounds. What is most important to you? What should I prioritize so that you get the most value out of the resources you have? And that's how you align well-being and performance in the workplace, is that your manager might want you to take on 50 projects, but you're only there for the hours that your contract allows. So what you want to do is really have that conversation about what is the most important. So if I make it to the end of the list, like if you can find groceries for that amount of money, good luck. Maybe they're hidden somewhere, but if they're not, what is most important for you? And I think that's how we align those two, is to always be upfront about our own needs so that the organization can help us meet those needs if they can. And if they can't, then they have to reevaluate what they want from us. Right? But it's like a negotiation, and it's a balance that you have to find. And you don't necessarily get it right every time. You might be pressured for a week. That's okay. Nobody dies from that. It's when it becomes this unconscious habit of just giving, doing more, and trying to compensate for what is perhaps the HR's role, what is the manager's role, what is the team's role. And you're trying to do it all because some of them might not be fulfilling their roles. Sometimes it's even as bizarre as I had a client once and she had 2 managers, not because it made sense on an organizational level, but because of restructures in the organization. One department was closed down, but they didn't want to fire or this person or transfer. So they're like, oh, we'll just have 2 managers. Now this is very difficult for my client because, okay, so who manager do I go to? So, and they hadn't aligned their role so that it made sense. So suddenly there were 2 managers, but not because it made sense. And that was a stress factor for my client because they hadn't aligned. So the organizational diagram didn't make sense in terms of what the organization's core focus and purpose was. It was a decision made based on emotional. And my client was trying to overcompensate for that by involving them both, not knowing when to involve each. But instead of being upfront and saying, hey, something is not working for me, who do I confront about these things and these things? Who controls the resources that I can have available? But the interesting thing is she internalized it as, oh, it must make sense that there are 2 managers. So I'm the one who's not really coping with this very well, but there wasn't. And it made sense when we drew an organizational diagram, which I always do in the first session, because it's important to understand your role in relation to the different actors in the organization and how you relate to them and how that, like, so you know who to turn to, like who's responsible for what. So we just have to be careful about sometimes internalizing the difficulties that we meet by saying, oh, it's probably me who's not getting it, or it's maybe me who's working too slow. So sometimes we have to take a step back, and it's easier to do that if we have the graph, for example, right? Because if I monitor that I've had 2 bad months, then there's something wrong, but I'm still in a mental state where I can start to look at solutions. Whereas when you really have been pressured for 6 months, it's very hard to do something right there because you're so exhausted mentally and emotionally that just trying to figure out solutions and navigating in that becomes more and more difficult the more pressured you are. So if you can be ahead, that's always the best. Yeah. So the second tool is another tool that my clients are very happy about. And it's because how do you have this, the next one. Like, so how do you have these personal conversations in a professional way? For example, telling your manager, I haven't slept much, or telling a coworker you can't take their assignments, even though you know they're pressured because you are as well. And I think I want to start talking, if you just look at the figure up to the right, I drew this arrow because I want to say this is what it means to be professional. So professional isn't in the personal sphere, like it's only about what I want, what I need, and it's not just about the organization, what they need and what they want. It's about finding out how those two align and how you can create win-win benefits. So there's 3 steps to having important conversations. It's completely okay. The first step is to be personal. So you want to reflect on how am I feeling right now? What is important? What is it that I want to communicate? Let's just say your manager. Like, so you want to be clear on what is going on. So it can be, I'm feeling motivated, excited. I want this opportunity. I want to grow in the organization. Or it can be, I'm feeling overwhelmed and worried because I'm keep getting more and more piled up and I'm not sure which assignments to prioritize, or I'm not sure if I have time for it. Once you've done that, so that's how you started, then you go to analyzing the organizational context. So why is it important for your manager to know this? Let's say you're having this conversation with your manager. So of course, you're not going to tell your manager, I'm worried that I can't pick out the right birthday cake on Friday, because that's not relevant to your manager. So you have to figure out, how is this also important for my manager to know? So let's say, for example, you are overwhelmed. Well, it's important for your manager to know because there are different consequences to this not being handled. One is the quality of the work, or it could be that you have to end up taking a sick leave and he'll have to miss out on having you in the team. Or it might be that you would consider leaving for another organization because it's just too difficult for you to keep up. So you just want to figure out, like, how is this also benefiting the organization negatively or positively? But now we're talking about it as a difficult conversation because you want to frame it within that. Then step 3 is you want to have thought of a solution yourself. Again, why it's important to not wait until you're really burned out, because then this is difficult and then the solution is, I need you to step in. But let's say we still have a bit of personal resources because it hasn't been that long we've been pressured. You want to figure out, what's the solution? Is the solution that you have fewer assignments? Is the solution that he prioritizes in your workload? Or is the solution that you get a break for a week so that you can cool off? So you just want to figure out what would work for me. And then you want to use that to tell him or her what would work for him or her. Like, so you're going to find a mutual agreement. So the 3 steps is just to resum. 1, the personal one. What is happening with me? What do I need? 2, to figure out, why is this relevant for, let's say here, the manager to know? Like, what would it cost them if I didn't speak up? And the 3rd one is, what could the solution be? To the right, I've given an example. So let's say, for example, you haven't slept well for a week. And last week you were then, this is a real case example, by the way. And then last week you were asked to do more because a coworker is unfortunately on sick leave. So there's no one else to do it. And you feel like, presentation there?
Mariam, I'm very, and our audience, I'm very sorry. I think I had an issue with the internet. I am going to have a look to see. Yes, we haven't lost our attendees. I am going to share the screen, and again, very sorry about.
No, that's okay. No, that happens. We will manage.
Okay, so back to
yeah. Okay. So, was I cut off at any time, or?
If you can go back to step 3, I think that would be the best, because then I lost you, and I think it's my Wi-Fi who went a bit crazy.
Let's just go back. So let's say you're sitting in front of your manager. You would start by saying, I want to talk to you because I haven't slept well this weekend, and I'm feeling overwhelmed by the amount of work that I currently have. I worry that it will impact the quality of my work if I say yes to doing more right now. I would like to talk to you about how I best prioritize my time to ensure that I put my effort into the projects you view as having the highest priority. What do you think of this? So this is an ABC, right? And if anybody has another subject that you would like me to try and put into this framework, just write it in the chat section and we can try to formulate that. But this is basically how you want to do it. Start off with what's going on. 2, how will it impact the organization? And 3, what's the solution?
Great. Okay. Sorry. I'm going to stop sharing now. Right. Just moving on this, because I don't see any questions in the Q&A yet. But just thinking about the fact that we do have students and recent graduates who either are about to start a new role or have just started a new role. Mariam, you did mention you had.
Just 1 second. What if it isn't about prioritizing work but not being able to progress work because the manager keeps changing their mind, often leading? Okay, that's an awesome question. Thank you, Diana. Okay, can we go back to the model?
Yes, of course.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's great. I'm very happy that we
Question.
have questions. Here we go. Can
Okay.
you see the full screen?
No, yeah, I can, but I don't think they can.
Here we are.
Okay. Let's say, Francine, if I wanted Diane to maybe go live with us, it's optional, of course. Would that be possible? Because then I could ask questions.
You won't be able to do that now.
Can I ask Diana, could you just write what is this impacting then? Like, what would you like the outcome to be? So just start by writing maybe, how does this make you feel? And what would you like the outcome to be? And while you do that, we can just talk about it. So the question is, what if it isn't about prioritizing work, but not being able to progress work because the manager's changing their mind often, leading to a lack of autonomy? So if this was me, well, I'm just waiting for Diana to write, but if this was me, I would be feeling confused and overwhelmed. I would feel like I would feel unmotivated. So that would be the first. I would say, I need to talk to you because the fact is, you keep changing your mind. Like, what is too much often feels like, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we're going to get to some of it later, but I'm just going to answer this. So it's demoralizing, often feels like gaslighting and a lot of self-doubt. Yeah, that sounds toxic, Diana. And sometimes the manager can be. So we're talking here about your level of influence, but you can't change who this person is. But what I would do to have the conversation, just to see if you can influence him, is that I would be honest about him. First of all, I would be factual about the last two times that he did this. So that when you have the conversation, you're basically also stating the circumstances. So for example, let's say it was last Thursday and then the week before that. I would start the conversation by saying, so you have twice changed the direction of this assignment. You did it this day and you did it that day. I'm feeling, so you can't, yeah, you're feeling demoralized and gaslighted, but I would use self-doubt. I'm feeling like I'm doubting myself. I don't know what direction it is. And I don't feel I have the autonomy that I need to be able to do a good job. That would be organizational wise. The outcome, I'm not sure, maybe for the, yeah. So, and organizational wise, I would say, I really want to make sure that I'm doing a good job. This assignment has this priority. So we also want to place like, what's the cost if you're not doing this assignment? And I would therefore like for us to discuss, I would therefore like for us to agree on a direction. And if this can't happen, then I would like somebody else to take over this assignment. Right? What you want to do is you can say how you're feeling, that you're feeling like you're getting a lot of self-doubt and it's impacting the quality that you can put into the work. You want to say that I would like for us to discuss maybe even the boundaries around how much can the assignment change, what can't be changed, and what are the criteria for if it needs changing or not. And if he can't do that, then I would need to hear what other examples there have been of behaviors, because it might be a toxic work relationship. And you can't control that. And unfortunately, there's a lot of toxic managers out there. Yeah, Diana, what are you thinking about the response? I hope it was helpful. You're welcome. Otherwise, you're welcome to write me on King's Connect, and I'll try to give you a more concrete answer. But what you want to be careful of is also to monitor your self-talk. You don't want this to start self-doubt. You want to really keep control of the self-doubt here. And also look at how he how are your coworkers reacting to him? Is this just you reacting, or what is his relationship patterns in the workplace? Yeah. So good luck with that.
Thank you very much, Diana, for sharing me this. And I think he will follow up with Mariam and Kings Connect. And we do hope you'll find some good solutions. I think at the moment we don't have further questions. Should we talk about some advice that you have in general, Mariam, for our students and recent grads who are listening to us right now?
Yeah, I want to start off with, that tool number 3 that I sent you in case we had time.
Yes.
I want to show it. I just want to talk about, when we get our first job, typically when we get a new job, we're very excited. And sometimes we can tend to go all in and go all in with the strengths that we have. We're not really aware of what we have to be careful with. In my coaching sessions, I often use Hoffman's core quadrant, and I won't use it in the first session. I will use it later on just to show where the pitfalls might be. So for example, with the client who started coming to me in August, the stress graph, we use this, for example, to see, well, how is she sometimes contributing to her ending up getting more work? So Hoffman's core quadrant is about learning to manage your core qualities so they don't become your pitfall. So it's this thing about there can be too much of a good thing. So there's 4 quadrant. One is the core model. So think of it as it's a skill that comes naturally to you. It's something that you're good at. You're often complimented on. So it's also something that you're known for. And it's this, you can often do it effortlessly. It comes naturally to you. And it's also something you enjoy doing when it comes into play. So for example, it could be you're a caring person. So what Hoffman says is that we're often not aware that we can actually sometimes display our qualities or core strengths in an exaggerated way. And here it actually becomes our pitfall. So for example, too much of a good thing if you're caring is that you can have difficulty setting boundaries. You could say yes to things that aren't really your responsibility because you want to be helpful of others. So it can actually become a very big obstacle. So when, for example, you're starting a new job, you might want to just think about, what am I typically known for as being good at? And what would I have to be careful in my new job? Like, what could I do too much? So if you're structured, what would too much structure look like? It could maybe be I become rigid, or I lose sight of what is the value. So let's say your manager gives you a project and you're very structured. Then maybe you lose sight of what's the purpose, what's the value we're bringing. So you can actually, you can actually become an obstacle because you're not really engaging in the relational, right? So Hoffman says the challenge is really where our self-development is. So we have to learn to balance our core qualities, otherwise they can actually become our obstacles. So for example, a caring person might have to work on learning to say no more. Or before saying yes, asking herself or himself, hey, is this really my responsibility? Or if they're feeling overwhelmed, to learn to tune in with themselves and say, okay, what do I need right now? Because a caring person will typically tune into other people's needs and neglect their own. So they're very much outside here, zooming in, zooming out, but not really connected to what are my needs. And the reason for that is the allergy, which is too much of a good thing. That's too much of being good at setting boundaries, is somebody who always says no. So typically a caring person would have the allergy of not liking somebody who's selfish, somebody who only thinks of themselves. And when they meet this person, they will typically fall straight into the pitfall. So for example, in meetings, what it can look like is, let's say in a project management meeting or something, nobody says yes to this assignment. And this person will then go like, I'll do it then, like going straight to the pitfall. And what this person wants to be aware of is, what are my challenges and how can I be mindful about strengthening myself within this area? because typically your core quality you're very good at without training, without having to think about it. So if you're going into a new job or you're a recent graduate, I would definitely use the time that you have, because there is something with a new job is that the first 3 to 6 months is what I call a legitimate learning process. Like, you can make mistakes, you really don't have to over deliver. So take it slow and focus on what are my challenges and how can I balance the core strengths that come naturally to me. So you can think about 3 of your core strengths, things you know you're good at, that you've seen yourself be good at in university or in previous jobs, and immediately start thinking about, well, too much of that thing, how is that harming me or harming my results? And then go down to the challenge and say, so how do I balance this core strengths so I don't fall into the trap, the pitfall? And then what I would do is I would start writing down like situations that you had to be conscious about, and just small improvements, because just being cautious about this will really get you far. And then with the allergy, be if you're caring, for example, and you come into a workplace that is a bit stressful, be careful about not being the yes person. And especially you will be triggered to say yes if you're in a room with people who only say no, because you're going to be like, I'm not this person. Like, you will almost feel a magnet pulling you the complete opposite direction, which is the pitfall. And you really want to there just be, okay, what's my challenge? How do I avoid falling into the situations that can benefit influence my performance or my well-being, right? And basically, I just want you to take with you from this model that your core strength also has the opposite. There's also something about too much of the good. So you just want to find out, how do I balance my core strengths, especially at the beginning of your work, because habits are quickly formed in the new workplace. You can quickly become known as the yes person or quickly be known as the structured person. You don't want to be stuck in those roles. You want to balance it out. You want to nuance who you are. So you also want to deliberately show up in your challenge section so that sometimes you say no. That way it's not going to be difficult for you to break the rapport, because they're used to you saying yes. So take advantage of being in a new job by mindfully practicing yourself in the challenge area and not overusing your qualities, because this is where you're comfortable and confident. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayim. I think we have a new question that just arrived. So Rajeshwari, and I'm sorry if I slightly mispronounce your name, says, in my organization, it's normal to work beyond office hours. As a result, I feel pressurized to work longer and leave on time. This also leads to disruptions in my personal life and routine activities. How do I go about this?
Yeah, that's a good question, and a question that is also often asked by my own clients. I think there is 2 things to this. One, you might want to observe, what would happen if you didn't work long hours? So one thing is the culture dictates it because everybody does, but does the management also articulate that this is an expectation that they have? And then secondly, you can actually do this with the first one, is to have an open conversation with your manager. So you might say, I'm guessing you like being there, but it's the working hours that are problematic. So you want to be honest about saying, hey, I like working here, but the long work hours are interfering with my personal life, and it's making me hard to balance it all. What I would really like is to deliver high value work, but within these work hours. That way I can stay committed to the workplace and to my life after work. How does this sound? Like, where can we negotiate here? So I would have an open conversation with your manager. And of course, if they say you have to put in these hours, then that's the personal choice. And I would definitely say that if you know that something else matters to you, then no workplace is really worth it, because at the end of the day, it is a transaction, right? So you're giving something and they're giving something. You have to ask yourself, is what I'm getting back worth what I'm sacrificing? And only you can answer that question. But I would say, first of all, have an honest and open conversation with your manager about the fact that it's difficult for you to put in these long hours, and that you would like to be committed to them, but also to the obligations after work. And therefore, your suggestion is I don't know how many work hours you want to work, if there's specific days you want off or shorter, but you want to be very specific about what you would like to happen. And then maybe you even want to come up with a suggestion that is a win-win, right? If you can. And then ask them, what are your thoughts about this? Does that answer your question?
I would think it does, but we'll wait to see if we've got a response from Rajeshwari. In the meantime, Mariam, could you share other advice that you would have for our audience? Because I feel like you talked about how to keep track on your well-being, then how to align well-being with performance, thinking about avoiding internalizing internalizing what you think you're doing wrong, when actually you need to just reflect on your well-being. And then you talked about being always a step ahead, and try to find that win-win balance, which might be less easy in some places than others. But yes, I was wondering if you would have other advice that you might have not talked about yet.
Well, I think you're right. I focused a lot on what is our level of influence, like what can we do? So, for example, we can monitor our well-being so that we're not 10 steps behind once we realize we're stressed. And the other one was how to have these conversations with your manager, with the people responsible for what you're trying to change. And then the third one was like how to manage your core strengths so that you don't end up in these pitfalls. But at the end of the day, we can't change a system that is too dysfunctional. Like, no matter how much you reflect, how much you're ahead, like all we've talked about is that you have a level of influence and you can make the most of it. But let's say that there is bullying in the workplace, there's bad management, there is high levels of stress. You can't change that. That's simply without your level of influence. So you also want to, once you've done these things, you also want to sometimes step back and say, do I need to leave to go to another place? Like, is this matching what I want out of my professional life? Because we know that the negative impacts of being in a stressful organization is low self-esteem, low life quality outside work, sometimes depression, anxiety, burnout. It's not worth it. So it's just to say, to keep in mind that at the end of the day, I know that we've made work almost part of our identity, but it is still a job. We can love it, we can appreciate it, but we should never be so tied to it that we cannot leave once it's harming us, right? So we want to keep in mind it's a transaction. We want to keep in mind that we can like it, we can love it, but it's still something for something. It's not a family. And I think that's the unhealthy thing about organizations today, is that they're very much they're very much targeting our emotional commitment. Like, we are doing this together. It's an identity. It's a brand, but it's really not. It's still like a fantasy, right? Because at the end of the day, you're doing something. You're getting paid for it, and that's what it is. You can get fired from one day to the next if things aren't going well in the organization, or if there's organizational restructures where you just don't fit in. Like, so if it's a family, or if we're really that tight and connected, that wouldn't happen. We'd be like, okay, but that's the truth, and it goes two ways. So I just want you to just also think about that sometimes some organizations can be so dysfunctional that you can't do anything about it. But doing what I've just talked about, you can leave the organization knowing that the dysfunction is in the organization and not in you. So often people who burn out and then leave the organization, they also leave with a more wounded self-esteem, because they didn't really see clearly the destructive madness in the organization, and that everybody was stressed. Like, the typical sign of a stressed organization is when the management level is stressed. The thing is that the good manager will admit that he or she is stressed and that they don't have the overview, whereas the more typical human manager will sometimes pretend that they have it and be like, oh, don't worry, we'll figure it out, instead of saying, I haven't figured it out. So when the manager at least is honest, then the employee goes there thinking, oh, it's not just me. But if the manager goes and says, oh, don't overthink too much. Yeah, I know you have a lot to do. Just take it one step at a time. The person can leave there thinking, oh, I'm also too sensitive. Or maybe I'm overthinking. Whereas, yeah, you are overthinking, but there's a good reason for that, because right now you're being bombarded with information and that isn't even consistent. But there's no honesty in it, because if it was, you would know, okay, the problem is out here, it's not in here. So there's nothing wrong with having a stressed manager, but the good stress manager is at least honest about being stressed. So it's just to say that if you don't have that trustful relationship with your manager, and even when you have the conversations in the professional way by stating your needs, the organization's needs and solutions, then there's really nothing you can do, because one of the most harming things in an organization in terms of organizational stress factors is a bad relationship with an employee and a manager, because the manager is supposed to protect you in the organization by ensuring that it's translated what the organization is trying to do. You also have the resources to do your work. There's clarity about prioritization. And if a stress manager sits there, they won't have the overview. They will sometimes be emotional, shut off, or be overly engaged, or interfere in your work because they're trying to protect their self-esteem by using their power to make you insecure. And that's just not healthy. So you have to be conscious about that as well.
Okay, I do have a question actually. When you mentioned that if someone leaves an organization after being burnt out, that can impact their self-esteem because they wouldn't have realized that there were problems within the organization. So I think my question here is, if that were to happen, how do you then rebuild your self-esteem to then apply for a new job and then go on interviews? How would you do that?
Yeah, so I would say using the graph, that was tool number one. Sometimes when you're feeling like you're not enough, you want to really map out the pressure you've been under. You can even use this in your personal life or in a specific relationship. Let's say you're feeling like, oh, I'm the one who's wrong in this friendship. You could use this graph, the last 6 months, and the incidents that have happened and the stress or toll it's had on you. You just really want a reality check with yourself. It can also be helpful to see a psychologist who understands organizations that way, because if a psychologist doesn't understand organizations, you might say, oh, don't take it too seriously, trust yourself. But understanding how organizations work can also give you an insight into seeing, well, it makes sense that you've been lost in this system. So I would say seek external help, or use the graph just to get a more nuanced picture of the pressure you've been under, so that it's not all about you and you not living up to the what I was going to say. I had the Danish word for it. I just have to find the English. Live up to the expectations as if they were clear to begin with, or realistic, because they probably were none of, right?
Great, thank you very much. We still have a few minutes.
One thing, there's no question.
Yes.
Is there any questions?
No, so I was going to say we don't have any questions yet, but do. Yes, go on, Mariam.
Yeah, I was just going to say to what you said about leaving for a new job. My experience is that it's not so much that people can see that they're insecure. Like, I think we're also very good at masking how we really feel. So we can go into apply for a new job, right? And be very secure, and not just fake it, but be it. But it's the minute that they get into a workplace that triggers the feeling that they didn't deal with before, that they start creating a thicker narrative about, oh, it's also me, I can't handle it. And I always attract the wrong people in organizations. Like, I have two bad managers now, it must be me. So it's just that if you don't nuance your first experience, you might be taking something with you unconsciously that is not really healthy, because it thickens the story about you being the problem, not being enough. And we're all, yeah.
Yeah, how would you go about this then, when it's something that we are not conscious of, and then we go and apply for a new job and we have a new job, and then somehow something triggers what we haven't really thought of, something that we've just internalized. How would you go about this?
Well, the easy answer is to fact check, but it's too difficult because there could be so much emotional tied. I would say get somebody external that is competent and then have that conversation with this person, this reflection space. So not even with a friend, because sometimes we don't trust friends. They just say, "Oh yeah, your manager is list." Like sometimes, so you go to somebody that you believe have the right competencies and then get that space to reflect, to look at things from different angles. So it's not about feeling safe, not feeling safe. It's about just exploring what is actually going on and finding meaning in it. Because often it's the lack of meaning that is the most difficult to navigate in. Like we don't have that red thread of what we've been through and what's going on. So we're always just reacting. Whereas if you have that meaning, you can learn from previous experiences because typically when you're burned out, it's organizational dysfunctions, but it's also you having overcompensated, believing that you're not enough if you're not succeeding in this role. And maybe what would people say if you quit your job after a year? So there's also some personal assumptions underneath that is driving your behavior because another person chooses to be lazy and not engaged because in dysfunctional organizations, you can actually also get away with a lot, right? Because there's so much chaos. So a person can actually sit and almost do nothing or pretend to do something but not do something and get away with it. So the fact that you're choosing this instead of this also has something to do with our personal assumptions that sometimes we have to look at because we all don't feel enough. Like we all have this occasional experience about not being enough. That just makes you human. But it's about when you have that feeling to just step back and say what's actually going on and being compassionate with yourself instead of stepping into comparison mode, which we typically do by saying, oh, they could do it, they should do it, who am I if I'm not? So just step out of it and be more compassionate with yourself. And remember, your job status never says something about your value as a human being, just like your relationship status doesn't. So, like, try to detract your worthiness from anything that is external.
Great. On that very beautiful, inspiring note, to stay compassionate with yourself. Unless, Mariam, you want to add last words before we start closing.
I just want to finish off again with the metaphor with the shopman. Just when you're starting to feel like you own a shop and your manager comes in, your coworkers come in, and they want a lot for a little, you want to might think about, okay, is there a equal trade here in terms of what they're expecting and what I'm getting? And getting in terms of monetary compensation, but also in terms of time, in terms of support and resources. And if there's not, you want to start talking about how to make that more equal.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mariam, for your time today. It was very nice to hear about your experience and talk about a very important subject. I would also want to thank our attendees today and the people who shared difficult questions. Do feel free to reach out to Mariam on King's Connect. I'll also put the link below for those who are not on King's Connect yet. So just let me do this now so you have the link. Just to let you know that if you're interested in learning more about your career options, do make sure to use the careers and employability services, which you continue to be eligible for up to 2 years after you graduate. I've mentioned King's Connect. You can use King's Connect as well, where you can also find a mentor and talk to fellow alumni who are working in jobs and fields that you are interested in. And do check the many webinars that we offer to you by visiting the alumni events listing page. If you do have any questions about what we shared today, do not hesitate to get in touch with the alumni office by emailing us at forever@kcl.ac.uk. Also our social media channels, such as @KCL Alumni on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you like to share this webinar with your networks, you can use the hashtag #ForeverKings. Just a couple of things from me before we end this webinar. Just to let you know that we'll have our first King's Expert Series with President and Principal Professor Kshitish Kapoor on the 28th of October on the importance and impact of universities in this post-COVID world. And also, just to let you know, the Global Institute for Women's Leadership is offering women in the UK aged 18 to 30 the opportunity to be involved in a webinar in late October, led by Julia Gillard, Australia's first female Prime Minister and chair of JOL, and registration closes on 17th of October. I will share that information with you in your follow-up email, so do check your inbox in the next few days. And yes, that's all for me. Once again, thank you very much to all of you for joining us today, and thank you, Marianne.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, just seeing a message on the Q&A from Nathan saying, do you have LinkedIn, Marianne?
Yes, I do. And please do add me. I would love to connect with you and everybody else.
Let me see if I can find you and put that on the chat as well. So that's easier for everyone. Here we go. I'll put that on the chat as well. Great. Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you, Francine. Have a great day.
You
Bye.
too.